The 2025 Women's Euros is here. In preparation for the tournament, we're analysing every single nation. Today, we're on to Iceland. As the Fjallanadrottning, or Queens of the Mountain, prepare to travel from Reykjavik to Bern, we assess their chances at the tournament. In this video, we look at the players that can make a real difference and why Iceland should fancy themselves to get out of the group stage. This is our Iceland Euros preview. So let's get into it then. Today, we're going to be previewing Iceland in Group A. And we'll be discussing how far we think they can go in this tournament. And let's start then by looking back at Iceland's history in the Euros. They've been in 6 previous tournaments. Best finish of a quarter-finals, Harry.
Yeah, they've done very, very well, as you say, going into their 6th tournament. They're a side who I think that they vary different to the other teams that you see at the tournaments. What you usually get with nations is they either had a really good run in the past where they made tournament after tournament, and then in the present they're not really featuring, or they've done nothing, and like you spoke about with Switzerland yesterday, have had a really good run of making it 3 in a row. Iceland are kind of the anomaly where they had they made a couple tournaments in a row back in the 80s and the 90s, and then it was a bit slow at the turn of the millennium, and then they got back into tournament football in 2013. They're back in this edition as well. They made the most recent one in 2022. So they've done well. They've made 3 of the last 4, which I think is pretty impressive for a nation that not many people really talk about. And I think that they've done very well, especially when the tournaments are so small. When you have these 32 team tournaments, it can be a little bit easier. But when there are only 16 teams going, to be involved in as one of those 16 teams, I think is really promising for Iceland.
Yeah, something we speak about across the men's and women's game, how a country with such a small population is able to have such a competitive football team. But they've done really well to compete on both fronts there and raise that level from a small nation competing on the biggest stage. However, it has been over a decade since they got out of the group stages of the Euros. The last tournament, they were grouped 3 draws and 3 matches, was a little frustrating, I think, for Iceland. And actually, looking at their recent qualifiers, they do seem to have an affinity with drawing games.
They love a draw. I think that if you're a bit of a neutral and you like games being even and fair, watch Iceland, because every game is most likely to be a draw. As you say, I feel that at the last Euros, when they drew all 3 of those matches, especially when they had a pretty tough group in there with France and the likes, I think that it depends how you view it. I think I view it as a little bit harsh for a side like Iceland to come in and stay unbeaten at a tournament and still get knocked out. I think is a little bit unfortunate. But then on the other hand, people will say, well, they should have won some games in there. They weren't, and they didn't do enough in the final third, and they should have won those football matches. So it depends which way you look at it. But the fact that they didn't lose a single game is slightly promising, because it shows that they're not just qualifying and getting smashed. And I think that this year they will look to do the same again, not draw every game and get knocked out, but they'll look to be positive and to try and take 3 positive results from all 3 of their games. And as you say as well, the Nations League fixtures had recently and the qualification, they love these. Iceland are very good at keeping games close and being competitive against sides that are bigger than them. The problem is they're also having those same games when they're playing sides that perhaps are a little bit worse, and that's why it's a very interesting dynamic at Iceland, because yes, it's brilliant that they can, over the last couple of years, they've drawn with sides like France and drawn with sides like Norway, but there's other sides in there where you think, it shouldn't be close. Iceland should be beating them comfortably. They shouldn't be scraping through 1-0. They shouldn't be, labouring to a draw. So I think for Iceland, it's all about timing based on what we've seen so far. Can they get on the right side of these results? If they are going to keep their games close, if they are going to be 1-0s, 2-1s, 1-1 draws, can they make sure they're on the right side of those results and making sure that they are bringing in enough points to get into the knockouts?
It does feel like the strongest Iceland side we've seen for a while. I think especially in attacking areas, there's a lot of players now who play in the top European leagues. So I think they're in a really good position in that regard. Talk to me about qualifiers then, Harry. How did Iceland get to the Euros?
It was actually a really impressive qualifying campaign, and it was one of those where you look at it and go, no, they could come into the tournament and do some real business, because they had to work for it. They're in a very, very difficult group. I thought they did extremely well to finish in the top two, to be in that League A, and to finish in the top two was really impressive. To beat Germany as well on the way. Yes, they did lose them 3-1, but to turn them over 3-0 as well was really impressive. That Germany loss was their only loss of the qualifiers, so it was a really impressive stuff from Iceland. And I speak about how they kept those, they're good at keeping those games close and doing well. They only conceded 5 goals in 6 games, and when you consider they conceded 3 of those in one game to Germany, suddenly that's conceding 2 goals in 5 games, and that is a very, very impressive record. That is the kind of record that can win you games. What they need to do is bring that, bring those goals up. But I think overall they've proved in qualifying that they've got a lot to give, and especially when you look at how some other sides got here, finishing. I mean, we'll get onto it later in these previews, but some sides were absolutely smashed in the Group A league, and then they managed to get through the playoffs because they played a lot of weaker sides. Iceland didn't do that. They challenged the best, and they qualified straight through by finishing in the top two. They keep their place in League A of the Nations League. They'll be back in League A for the qualifiers for the World Cup. So it was a really big qualification stage for them, and I thought they did very well to keep things very mature. And there were some classy performances in there. There were some really classy performances, but I think when you look at it on paper, that qualifying record is something that I think Iceland fans should be very excited about.
Yeah, definitely. But it has been a year since those qualifiers
Yes.
back in July last year. And more recently, we've seen the UEFA Nations League, where I think Iceland flattered to deceive, to put it mildly.
Yeah, I think that, again, we speak about them loving a draw. They drew four of their 6 games. Again, and especially when you consider they were games where they were coming up against sides that they are going to face and potentially face at this European Championship. So you can, it's one of those, again, depends how you view it. You can view it as, oh well, they drew, so they're not giving anything away, or you can view it as they drew again and they showed that perhaps they can't beat those sides. But I think that, again, that the draws are really stacking up on their record, and they don't want to be in a position like they were in 2022 where they do well, they fail to lose, they pick up 3 draws and they don't get through, because I think that would be another really harsh way to go. They deserve to win, to go and get themselves into the knockouts and win a game at these championships. 2013 was a good run, but they got to the knockouts and then got smashed by a very, very good Sweden side. So I think that Iceland, they need to start turning those draws into wins. They didn't do it in the qualifiers, they didn't do it in the Nations League, but they need to find a way to do it when they get to the major tournament.
Yeah, they've got to find a way to get through those sides. Looking at those Nations League games then, there was an importance to them because they played Switzerland, they played Norway. Is there a concern given they didn't beat either of them? It was draws against both of those opponents. Obviously, playing them before and now playing them in the Euros, is that a concern for Iceland?
It goes both ways because they drew all 4 fixtures to both those 2 sides. Yes, they didn't beat them, but yes, they didn't lose to them. So it's a really difficult one to gauge as to where they're at, because, I think it would look much better for Iceland if they had managed to get some wins over those sides. But the fact that they also didn't lose. So you've got to look at the positives. I think that although Norway are below them in the world rankings, I think that Norway squad's extremely strong. So to draw, I think you have to base off opponent. To draw to Norway isn't too bad. To draw to Switzerland, it's okay, but you'd expect them to be beating them. But it all comes down to what they can do at the tournament when they get there. But the results over the last couple of years and their previous tournament form, they're gonna have to beat it. They're gonna have to, they're either gonna have to match or better their expectations if they want to push on and do well. So the bar is set low, which is encouraging because they could beat that bar this year. But it would also suggest that bar is difficult to beat because they haven't really made it out the groups properly on enough occasions to really show that, or to prove that they can compete and they can get into those knockout stages.
Right, let's have a look then at the Iceland tactics. So as we can see on screen, Well, actually, it shows the 4-2-3-1, but Iceland, the biggest thing I'd say about them is flexibility. So this 4-2-3-1 could easily look like a 4-3-3, as so, with Williamsdottir a little bit deeper, the wingers getting a little bit higher, and they're their two in-possession shapes. So we'll see often it will look a little bit like this, or it could be Williamsdottir a little bit lower, and these wingers getting a little bit higher. So there is a lot of flexibility with how Iceland like to play. Out of possession, again, they use about 3 different shapes. You can sometimes see this 4-2-3-1 type shape as shown on screen. We can also sometimes see a 4-4-2. So we'll see both these wingers come narrow. It's quite a common out of possession system where you have everyone very narrow, very compact. And the biggest thing about Iceland, it's very difficult to play through the lines against them. Iceland, as we mentioned, have had a lot of draws this season and in recent times. That's because they are very difficult to play through. So playing balls through the lines here, especially against this really strong midfield partnership of Brynjarsdottir and Jóhannsdottir, that's really difficult to play against. So it'll be interesting to see how they use this. Sometimes as well, we'll see this 4-1-4-1 type shape where you've got Jóhannsdottir will play this a little bit deeper role. You've got these 2 central midfielders. Williamsdottir will slot in. So this is where I talk about that 4-3-3 type shape. And then they will play this 4-1-4-1 with Jason then leading the line. We also sometimes see the 4-2-3-1 as I mentioned at the start. So very flexible Iceland, both with and without the ball, which is very interesting to see. The other thing I really like about Iceland is how this back line will jump up and down. So if we move everyone into a, sort of an attacking phase of play, you can see how this materialises in the game. So we'll put them into a 4-2-3-1 as they tend to be playing. Now, the biggest thing about Iceland is they don't like to push up their fullbacks. So we'll see Arnardottir and Arnatdottir sitting on this halfway line, or whoever does play at fullback at the tournament. That's going to be really interesting to see what they do there, because again, the reason they draw a lot of games is they don't really go for it. They hesitate a bit too much. So this flat back four tends to stay how it is. Now, it's got its negatives, as I mentioned. They don't tend to send these fullbacks forward and have that attacking advantage, but it is a really solid rest defence. They don't concede many goals in transition, which makes sense. Numerically, they've got 4 players here. Someone's going to be able to track back in behind, make those runs, and keep up with what's going on in there. So that it makes theoretical sense having these players back, but it does make them a little bit too hesitant. The other thing about this back four is with them all having a very similar position, it's easy then to have unity and have an organisation in the back line. So when these balls go over the top, they all drop back in unison. And actually this back line drops up and drops deep very effectively. So we'll see them move in a compact block. That's really good to see, and that organisation will be really helpful. My fear for Iceland at this tournament is whether they're going to be penetrative enough. Are they going to be able to break into the final third? They've got some very good attackers. I think players like Svindis Jónsdóttir, just to focus in on her for a second, if they can isolate her against the right back, so bring everyone over this side of the pitch, become very compact on this side of the field, and isolate Jónsdóttir up here against an opposition right back, that's going to be really dangerous, because she is an incredible footballer. Svindis Jónsdóttir, a very good dribbler, able to go either way against the fullback. If she goes towards the byline, these cutbacks are going to be really effective for finishers like Jason and especially Williamsdottir. She's been fantastic this season. She's scored a hat-trick in the Nations League for them. So she's got that goal-scoring prowess and a real range of finishes as well. If Jónsdóttir chooses to come inside with the ball, well, then you've got a really dangerous situation as well, because she's a brilliant ball striker, a brilliant finisher. She's definitely the player to watch out for Iceland. She's a player who can have a huge impact, a real spark of creativity. So I'd say Svindis Jónsdóttir, the player to watch out for. If they can make the use out of her, that will be very effective. The other player I'd say, Williamsdottir. I think it's a shame we're probably not going to see her lead the line at this tournament. She's also very good in midfield though, so that's no real bother. And actually, if they are playing sides, especially against Finland, who want to sit deeper, if you've got Jason in the box on them, dragging the back line deeper, it's going to give space for Williamsdottir where she likes it, in and around this penalty spot and on the edge of the box. So I think that's not too much of a problem. You can get her in these better goal-scoring positions by using this striker Jason to sort of drag players out of the way. The other player that we'll like to see in this front line, again, it's subject to change, had to try and piece together based on the Nations League games, but it'll probably be Leicester City's Clint's Eriksdottir. Eriksdottir can play anywhere across the front line, and it's similar with Svindis Jonsdottir, with Sin Jonsdottir lead the line at times, which is also a very dangerous situation. So that could be really interesting to see. My fear with Iceland, they're very solid defensively. I do feel they lack penetration in attacking areas. They've got some very good individuals. But my problem is, are they going to be able to kill games off? Are they going to be able to go and put a few goals past a team and finish the game off? We've not seen it yet in those Nations League fixtures, and that's what worried me. I thought they were much the better side against Switzerland, but they couldn't kill that game off. And so going into the tournament, my biggest fear is Iceland won't be able to kill games off. If they can find their goal scoring form, I think, as you can see, it's a really dangerous team. So I think there is huge reason to be optimistic about Iceland, but my fear will be they don't kill those games off quick enough. So they've got to do that. They haven't won a game since July 2024. If they are looking, I think, later stages of the games, they've got to push these fullbacks forward, because they've got a solid pivot here of Johansdottir and Brian Jansdottir. They can push these fullbacks forward. Eriksdottir and Jonsdottir are very comfortable playing in these sort of half spaces, so I think that would suit them very nicely. I think they've got to be less hesitant and push those players on if they're in a situation where that is needed.
So let's get into some predictions then. Looking at how Iceland may go in this tournament, I think looking at the group, Finland should be a game that they are able to win quite comfortably. It's going to be difficult. We know Finland are a tough side, as we're going to touch on in a few days. They set up really well defensively, and that's going to be difficult for them to break down. But you'd say that's the most winnable one. I think Norway's the biggest reach. I think Norway are a very strong side, as much as that may not be displayed in the rankings. But do you think it's right in saying that Switzerland game is probably the pivotal one? Because they should beat Finland. They'll probably lose to Norway. It could be tight, and if they get a result against Norway, that'd be huge. But does that leave then that game against Switzerland as the most important one?
Yeah, I think so. As you say, Iceland, they want to go out and win every game, but they will look at it as a management staff and go, right, it should be 3 points against Finland. We'll do well to get anything from Norway, so we need to go and get a win against the hosts. And that's the way. I think that is the most important game. It will be very close between them and Switzerland. I think Switzerland are got that similar message in terms of they should beat Finland. They probably won't beat Norway. So Switzerland and Iceland are probably going to end up being there fighting it out for that second spot in the group. So that will be a very, very important 90 minutes. Iceland, they're going to have to be brave, which is something that we spoke about those draws earlier. They're going to have to be brave. If they are drawing and then potentially they need a result, they've got to go for it. They're going to have to play out of their comfort zone and go and try and win the football match, because that's what happens when you get to these knockout tournaments. But I think Switzerland is the most important game. They can't afford any slip-ups against the likes of Finland, because that's exactly what Finland will feel like. They'll be looking at it and going, they'll be hoping that they can try and stop Iceland from picking up the points and cause them a few problems. But if Iceland can, make sure they don't slip up against Finland, if they get something from Norway, that's great. But full focus has got to be, for me, on that Switzerland game, because if they beat Finland and Switzerland, they should be through no problem. If they get any points against Norway, then they'll do well. But it's going to be tight, and it's going to be difficult. It's one of those groups where everyone can kind of take points off everyone, and while that again can benefit Iceland because they go and get a result against Norway, that's phenomenal. But they've got to make sure that they don't slip up in either of those games against Switzerland or Finland.
Yeah, I think that hesitancy is exactly right. As I spoke about in my analysis, they're way too hesitant at times. They need to push players further forward. We have seen it in some of the games where they've been behind and then turned those matches around. But the fact they haven't won since July 2024 has to be a worrying sign. So I think I'm optimistic Iceland can do well in this tournament. I think they will probably get out of the group stage. I think it's very close between them and Switzerland. My fear then is that if they are second in that group, it will likely be a fixture against Spain.
Yeah, I think that I see a lot of parallels here between their 2013 Euros and this upcoming Euros. Is that I think they've got a decent group stage. I can see them getting out of it, but as you say, they could rock up in the quarterfinals and get absolutely smashed like they did 12 years ago. But not again. They might not get smashed, but yeah, if they do get
Well, there's no guarantee they're going to play Spain. They could finish top of the group. And I think the second seed in Group C is probably one of the nicest fixtures you can get. I think either Italy, Belgium, or Portugal, they're all opponents Iceland would fancy themselves against. So I think the goal for Iceland has got to be to try and top the group, of course, as it will be for every team that's going to the Euros, try and do as well as possible. But I think Iceland can have that realistic aspiration. They should be able to beat Finland. I think they're more than capable of beating Switzerland, and there's no reason they can't compete with Norway. So I think Iceland are in a really exciting position, but it's going to be a difficult time. If Norway sharpen play as well as we know they can, then frankly, I don't think Iceland can bridge that quality gap. But Norway haven't performed like that at all throughout this whole golden generation. So that there's nothing saying they will at this tournament. So I think Iceland can take huge belief and confidence from that. I think the quarterfinals it depends who they draw, but that could likely be the last stage. I definitely can't see them getting past the semi-finals. I think once you're playing those Germany's, France's, England type teams, I think they're just a step too far for Iceland.
I think they're the team that you look at in terms of they're not dark horses to go out and win the tournament or to go and challenge the big guns, but they are those underdogs in a sense that if I'm looking at a side that could catch a few people out, Iceland are that side to go out and make it into the groups and throw themselves into the last eight, and that would be an achievement. I think that would be the aim, is they'll go into this, and if they get out the group stage, that's perfect. Again, I think that they will be frustrated by the fact that they didn't get through in 2022. That they did play decently, they didn't get through. They want to rectify that. It was only 3 years ago, so unlike other international tournaments, it is still pretty close. There's still very similar players, so that squad will want to go out and make sure that they put out a statement and they go and make sure they go and try and make it out the group, because they showed in qualifying, they showed in the Nations League that they can do it. And if they can bring that kind of performance and bring the heat when they get to the championships, then I think they're in good stead to finish in one of those top 2 places.
Yeah, I think to put it simply, they've got a better team than they did in the last tournament, and they've got a kind of group than they did in the last tournament. So with those facts considered, Iceland should be in for a very nice tournament. That, though, does conclude our preview of Iceland, our analysis of how we think they're going to play at this summer's Euros. If you have enjoyed, make sure to leave a like and get involved in the comments down below with your thoughts. If you haven't already, go and check out Switzerland from yesterday. That'll be on screen now. And join us tomorrow as we preview Norway. That was everything from us today. Thank you guys very much for watching, and we'll see you next time.
See ya.